Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's comes at us from Scrubs the Necko, a little more accessible than the other Richard Dawson song you listened to. We're going to be checking out the song Masseuse from the Peasant album by Richard Dawson. Let's dive in, see what Richard is bringing to the table today. Mostly gentle mostly gentle and serene. I really like this instrument right here. It's a guitar. Very sharp picking. Interesting note choices though. A majority of it is on the calmer side, but there's some tense elements in there as well. This bass over here, it's a nice counter. The percussion is all in on this beat though.
Fortune wags its tongue along the walkways of the bathhouse. They say
I think this snare over here is out of tune.
I am tired of man.
Maybe not that it's out of tune, it's just not properly in tune. No, yeah, it's out of tune. That whole moment had some weird tonality to it. But then this just sounds beautiful. Great section right here. Well, we're only a third of the way through. I think this is going to be a frustrating listen for me if this is indicative of the whole track.
A storm like a drum encompasses the priory as I go on mouse toes into the blind man's chamber.
Yeah, dude, this is gorgeous.
Over his bed, I push the blade between his ribs, but then in a flash he's got my wrist and he's pinned me to the floor.
That microtonal rise.
Endless open forest, amongst one-faced inches from my own. His breath smells like pears. He asked me then, would you like to see the pin retching on his film? I nod more than anything.
Very eerie and uncomfortable. It's interesting too because it is much like the previous pre-chorus, but harmonically different.
Inside
A variation, harmonic variation of the old one. I like that, tying it back.
such a plain pea of stone, no bigger than a thumbnail, and
And once again, I do like this moment.
believe how very ordinary it seems. Then it dawns on me, it was all mere folly, yes. Now you see, the pin's a pebble only, that which you so thirstily covered it over my dead body. Now it is yours to keep, you are its custodian. But first I must have your eyes, then the circle will be whole.
So really interesting idea here, dipping into Phrygian dominant at times while also focusing on tritones and harmonic instability by slightly detuning some of the notes here to get them a bit flat and clashing harmonically with the rest of the notes. It's just a lot of ways to create something unsettling with a lot of edge to it. That bass string though, it's been out of tune since the beginning of the song. Moving towards something more there's still darkness here though. Maybe like a weary victory. very interesting rhythmic idea here. What a wild song. And honestly, I'm quite surprised that Richard ends up pulling me in at the very last moment. I was right. This is a tough listen for me. It's not always something that works for me, but when it does click, oh boy, does it click. And there at the end, I really enjoyed, what was that, the final minute and a half or so? The outro of the song. I guess about the time that I mentioned the sort of uh, tired victory element is when the song really started to. I don't know that I'd say the song starts to click for me, but I think that moment does a great job of wrapping everything up while being emotionally present and heavy. It not only finds a way to tie the song up compositionally, not only just creates a nice sort of ending for the journey we've been through, but also finds a way to be emotionally evocative. This song kind of goes through a couple of phases, and I think it's interesting that despite its length, it's still pretty much just a verse, chorus, bridge, outro idea. What we get after the bridge is totally distinct. We don't come back to a chorus like the structure typically goes, but there is a very general pattern that we see up until about minute 6. The verse is a bit more difficult for me to get into, but there's some very cool ideas in it. It's incredibly layered. There's a strong sense of pulse to it, but not so much of a rhythmic cadence. It's kind of tough for me not to feel or count a 4/4 to this track. And if you do that, you certainly find phrases of ideas that line up within the 4/4 time signature. This is probably a 4/4 song, but so much of the verse is just a bunch of percussion instruments and even non-percussion instruments playing more percussive sounds on the downbeat. Boom, boom, boom. No variation, no syncopation, no variance. It is just this one beat. I really feel like the song was at least trying to create the sense of a 1/4 time signature, which is like 4/4. The quarter note is still the length of a note that fills an entire beat, but instead of having 4 beats per bar, there's only one. It's just a way of, I don't think that there's any prominent music really written in 1/4 because it's kind of difficult to play within. It doesn't really make a lot of sense visually on sheet music, and the ideas of it can be written out in a way that's more visually, aesthetically pleasing in 4/4. But I think the general concept behind it is that there simply is no downbeat. There is just a pulse. It's like a heartbeat. You can certainly take someone's heartbeat and assign a tempo and a time signature to it and create phrasing musically out of it, but it doesn't innately have any of that. As long as the person stays relatively in a similar state of calm, there shouldn't be any increase or accent points to it. It should be pretty consistent for the most part. That's kind of what I think this is trying to create here musically, is just rhythmic consistency, not really the idea of bars or accent points or syncopation. There's no groove here. You just get this heavy-handed pulse. It's kind of hard not to break that up into groups of 4 and then break those up into more groups of 4 to get a 16-beat phrase. I feel like that's just a normal thing once you become aware of time and tempo and meter to just kind of do. So much music is in 4/4. It's like when you see something and you're like, dude, that looks like a face. It's not a face. It's just, two little hoods with a smaller hood underneath it. I don't know. But our eyes and brain are so wired to registering faces that we can find faces even when they aren't. And the same thing happens here. So much of music is in 4-bar phrases of 4/4. And it's easy to break this up into it and mentally put those bars around it. But I don't think that's what Richard is doing. And I feel like I have talked about this topic for way too long now. But I do find that interesting. Not a lot of music goes in that route of trying to avoid a feeling of phrasing. You still have time and tempo. There's a very consistent, apparent tempo to all of this, but it kind of wants to break up phrasing in particular. Alongside that, though, we have layers and layers of instruments. Some of that is harmonic, just kind of playing chords, but so much of it is moving parts. Whether it is counterpoint, there's so much counterpoint in this song, and I don't know that all of it works, but it's certainly there. There's usually a guitar with some sort of moving idea. There's a bass with some sort of moving idea. There's some sort of twinkling ornamental thing over here that isn't just a one-off set of 3 notes. It's its own melodic idea. And it gets very cluttered and layered, but it's still there. It's still plenty of counterpoint alongside whatever the vocals are doing. We start out these verses on the simpler side, but we do build and build and build, sometimes up, sometimes out, increasing the amount of instruments on the outskirts of the song just as much as what's in the primary focus. The choruses try to strip some of that sound back. I don't necessarily think that we are simplifying the music during the chorus, but we do say, well, if we had 18 layers, what if we went for 12? Just kind of reduce things a little bit, focus it down. I found the choruses to be rather pleasant to my ears, and certainly a point that I enjoyed in the song, just looking at the verse and chorus structure here. The point that I found I enjoyed the most. And I think a lot of that comes down to tonality, which we're going to talk about in a couple of sections. After our verse and chorus, we enter into a very different moment here. It's a noise moment. There's an escalation of volume, escalation of harmonic tension and dissonance, escalation of layers, starting off with just a few and then adding more and more. It just becomes noisy. At a certain point, most of the instruments completely disobey the sense of tempo entirely and just start playing whenever they want. It turns into a wall of sound cacophony, and at a certain point just stops. And then we're back to the verse. I was a little thrown off about this, but after listening to the lyrics and kind of interpreting a little bit of that during the second verse, and then of course when we did this the second time through after the second chorus and listening to the lyrics there, I think it fits the story. Because in the first section he says something about stabbing someone between their rib cages. I don't remember. And the second time he lost his eyes. So these are both rather chaotic moments of some sort of turmoil or a fight of some sort. Having the music go into this noisy, chaotic direction It makes sense. It's certainly an artistic approach to it rather than a more academic, traditional approach to creating tension in music, but it absolutely sells the scene that's happening. That takes us to the outro. It's the final moment of the song, and like I mentioned, there's a weariness to it, even a sadness. There are elements of victory in it, but I don't know. By the end of the track, I don't know that I would call it weary victory anymore. Or maybe the victory is just much smaller scale than the sorrow. There is, maybe the battle is won, but the war is lost in a sense. I'm not necessarily saying that this is about a war, but as the saying goes, a small victory and a much larger price paid for that. It ends up feeling incredibly depressing, heavy, weighty, but I do think that the choir that wraps up the song, the very last thing we hear, has an optimistic tinge to it. It does feel like it ends on a lighter note of some sort, even if leading up to that point, it feels incredibly bleak. That's mostly the emotional weight of this tale. Rising escalation leading to noise, a reset of things, rising escalation leading to noise, and then a bit of a downer ending with a small bit of hope to it. I'd mentioned that harmonically, there's a lot of things to talk about here. I think this is an important point because it was something I immediately noticed in the track. In fact, the very first instrument we hear is a guitar, and I'm pretty sure the low string on it is out of tune. This is something that ends up being rather prevalent throughout the track. This low E, well, I'm going to assume it's the low string, whatever it's tuned to. It's not perfectly in tune with the other strings, and it constantly creates clashing harmony with the rest of it. It's obviously intentional on some level or another, but it is, at least for me, generally distracting. Every time it comes up, I immediately hear the warble of tension, or sorry, the warble of dissonance introduced into the music where it isn't always. Eventually, we also get a bass guitar that I think one of the strings is out of tune. I don't think it's the lowest one because the bass doesn't get down there all the time. But one of the strings seems a bit out of tune. And when the snare comes in on the side, which I don't think I've ever heard a snare this thumpy. It sounds like a tom, but certainly has the crack of a snare drum head to it. So I don't know what it is, but it could be that it's just detuned quite a bit. And people, maybe you're thinking, dude, tuning a drum, it just makes a sound. That's actually not true. Drum heads can be loosened or tightened, which changes the vibration of the drum head. Vibration, sound waves, it all comes together. You can actually tune drums. This feels like a very low tuned snare. Maybe there's even a type of bass snare. I'm not familiar with that now that I think about it, but I learned about bass flutes this year. So, there's the bass of everything. Maybe there's bass snares. Regardless, it's tuned rather low, but I don't think it's tuned to be a perfectly in tune note. I think it's just tuned to be low, and it does end up clashing with some of the notes in here. I think this is the first time ever I have mentioned in a song analysis that the drum is out of tune, but here we are. This is phenomenal. The first time. Not even just for the channel, in my life. I don't think I've ever heard a detuned drum. So, Richard Dawson, you're introducing me to new sounds here. This is wild. This sort of harmonic instability that comes through many instruments is my first and primary issue with this track. I think it can be used well. In fact, that building up clashing wall of noise segment works really well with this, as it's not just harmonic instability through note choice, but also through the additional intonation fluctuations going on the instruments that elevates the clashing, the tension, the anxiety of these moments. It works really well there. However, in the verses, I find that it just doesn't work as well. Maybe that's because I don't know the words to them. Maybe it's because they feel generally calm and inviting. It was one of the first things I said when the song started was this is calm and serene, I think was the words I chose. But I got interrupted because, like, I don't know, the second bar in, there was a weird dissonance to it. It feels like this song really wants to be one thing, but there's just one instrument that should have been tuned better. I say should have because it completely avoids authorial intent. I do believe that this song sounds the way Richard wants it to, and that the detuned instrument is the proper way to perform it. However, if we were to play this with properly tuned instruments, I do think that generally I would love the verse. There's a lot of great ideas in there, and despite the cluttered, sometimes obtuse counterpoint going on, it is generally pleasant to listen to. It's a very serene sound. It's just that the way that the instruments are tuned introduce a tension to the song that isn't technically there in the sheet music. And that's an interesting thing right there too. I mean, sheet music can always say detune the low string by, 30 cents or something like that. And sure, maybe it would say that in the sheet music, but you don't typically write that. You would just play a G. You put the G note in the sheet music. It's not something that you would normally write in. I found this to be something interesting, though. It's not just the instruments, it's also Richard. He can sing incredibly in tune with everything, just wonderful, raw style vocals. I don't think that there's any pitch correction going on in here at all. And I think a lot of that comes down to the way that his voice sounds. He generally sings around the right pitch, but his voice warbles quite a bit. Nobody can just hold a perfect pitch. I don't care if you're the best singer in the world, you're going to have little bits of variance to your pitch. That's where pitch correction usually comes in. Even your rock and metal vocalists are going to use just a tad to clean up the little bits. It's just a normal thing, and I know a lot of people get worried, auto-tune's ruining music, but no, this is just a normal practice, no different than applying EQ or a little bit of reverb to your vocals to make them sound better and what people would expect. This to me sounds very raw, but he's still a really great singer when he wants to be. There are other moments in this track where he seems to be incredibly flat, not consistently either. Just seems to be more variation in the pitch when he holds a note out. Sometimes he can be pretty spot on, a little bit of variance. Other times it's a very loose control over a pitch. I find it to be much like the other intonation elements in this track, incredibly frustrating to listen to because I really want that beauty in the music and he just refuses to give it at certain key points that don't really seem to follow a pattern. It's just sort of randomly he decided to be out of tune here. I don't get it. I'm trying to appreciate it though. I suppose that's all that I have to say on this then. It's an interesting journey that the song took us on. I think it's incredibly emotionally compact and prescient. There are some interesting intonation elements to it, but generally speaking, the layers and the writing, everything is fantastic. It's just more of a raw take on this. The rawness does introduce some other playfulness in here. There's some timing issues that I wasn't a super big fan of, but they were quite a bit less common than the intonation elements. But it is another facet of the song that just makes it difficult for me to enjoy. I would be interested in a more perfect version of this song. And again, the perfection is more to do with removing the intonation and timing elements in here and bringing it into what would probably be written on sheet music and playing it precisely like that without any of the raw elements to it. I completely appreciate that would be a very different track. I'm not saying it would be better, but I am curious what that would sound like. But I did still find the ending to be rather moving. And for me, I say that that's a pretty big bit of praise, given that this sort of, I don't know, raw, muddy performance is usually not my cup of tea, and yet it still found a way to connect with me despite the discrepancies I have with the majority of the way it was played. I'm ready to dive into some lyrics. Let's see what's going on there. Alright, here we have a fairly straightforward story being told. We have a protagonist who is hunting for the pin of Quib. Says that he who possesses it is granted eternal beauty. So, she said, I'm tired of men, of kneading the knots from their bulbous backs and necks and rinsing their filmy water from this mew of tiles. This is where the song gets its namesake, Masseuse. Our narrator, our protagonist, is a masseuse. It says, when I heard tell of the pin of Quib, straight away I knew I had to hold it at all costs. Verse 2 mentions finding who had the pin, going into this blind man's chambers, leaning over his bed and putting the blade between his ribs, but then he got my wrists and pinned me to the floor. This is the moment where the first chaotic instrumental happens, and then it starts to calm down, and we enter into the next verse, which says, I wake up gagged and bound. The monk's face inches from my own. He asked me, would you like to see the pin? And I said, more than anything. He pulled it from inside his coat, and the protagonist notices that it's nothing. Says, I can hardly believe how ordinary it seems, and then it dawns on me it was all mere folly. So recognizing that this was just nothing more than a wives' tale, a myth perpetuated, that the pin is just any old item that has a mythology around it. The monk says, yes, the pin is just a pebble only, that which you so thirstily coveted over my dead body, but now it is yours to keep. You are its custodian, but first I must have your eyes, then the circle will be whole. So this monk, who was a blind monk, must have found the previous owner of it, and having the same disillusionment, found out it's nothing more than just a little item, had their eyes plucked out, presumably because the person that they tried to get it from was also blind, having their eyes plucked out. This is a circle. The ownership of the pin of Quib. From this point, we have just the outro, which is the somber final minute and a half or two of this track that says, I once could see, but now am blind, and all sense of the world is lost. They went out searching for a treasure, found it wasn't what they thought it was meant to be, and now their life is totally uprooted and altered, affecting them in a vastly negative manner. What they thought the world was, how they thought it worked, is completely wrong. They say that their sense of the world is lost. I think lost is a really good word, pairing with a new sense of blindness, not being able to rely on sight anymore. Much like being in a dark forest, it's easy to get lost. So I think it's interesting that that word specifically is chosen. Not that their sense of the world is twisted or gone or flipped or altered, but it's lost. A feeling of being lost in this new world. this new sense of the world anyways. A rather straightforward tale here, and I think that the music tends to embody emotionally what's going on in the tale. I really appreciate it from that angle. It's still a song that I find, as I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, a little difficult to listen to. Maybe some of those eccentric elements are something that would soften over time as I listen to more of it, but after having listened to the entire song right here, I'm not too eager to dive back into it despite enjoying how it wrapped up. But these are just my thoughts. Richard Dawson's Masseuse, what did you think of this track? Did anything stand out to you? Is there anything you'd like to add on to what I said or possibly correct me on if I misspoke about something? Do you have a different take or opinion or perspective on this? Please put any of that and any other thoughts you might have about this track into the comments section below. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.